The moment the HOA president knocked on my door demanding I plow everyone's driveways for free because I owned a truck with a plow attachment. I knew this winter in Bennington, Vermont, was going to be interesting. I had moved into the Maple Ridge subdivision 3 years ago, back in 2022, specifically because the HOA fees were reasonable and the rules seemed minimal. My name is Trevor Samson, and I'm a contractor who works odd hours. The truck with the plow was essential for my business, not some community service vehicle. I bought the property at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story colonial with a long driveway that often accumulated significant snow during Vermont winters. The woman standing at my door that cold January morning was Patricia Whitmore, a 52-year-old real estate agent who had appointed herself HOA president 2 years prior. She wore a puffy white jacket that made her look like a marshmallow, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly I wondered if it gave her headaches. "Trevor, I'm sure you're aware that we have a responsibility to each other as neighbors," Patricia began without even a proper greeting. "The HOA has decided that since you have the equipment, you'll be handling snow removal for all 23 properties in our community." I stared at her, coffee mug halfway to my lips. "Excuse me, it's only fair. You have a plow, the rest of us don't. Community cooperation is what makes Maple Ridge special." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Patricia, I use that plow for work. I have contracts with businesses around town. I'm not a snow removal service for the neighborhood." Her smile vanished. "The HOA board voted on this last night. It's decided. We expect you to clear all driveways after every snowfall. It's for the good of the community." "Did anyone think to ask me first, or offer compensation?" "Compensation," she laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "You live here too, Trevor. This is about being a good neighbor. Besides, the HOA bylaws state that residents must contribute to community welfare when they have special capabilities." I had read those bylaws front to back when I bought the house. That clause refers to emergency situations, like if someone's a doctor and there's a medical emergency. "It doesn't mean I'm your personal snow removal service." Patricia's face turned red. "The board has decided. If you refuse, we'll fine you." "On what grounds?" "Failure to comply with community standards. We can levy fines up to $500 per violation." I took a long sip of my coffee, considering. "Patricia, let me be clear. I will plow my own driveway. I will not plow anyone else's. If you want to fine me, you'll need actual legal grounds, which you don't have." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening tone. "You're making a big mistake, Trevor. This community doesn't take kindly to selfish people." After she left, I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had helped me with the house purchase. He listened to my story and laughed. "Trevor, they have absolutely no legal standing. You can't be compelled to provide free labor. That's essentially demanding indentured servitude. The HOA clause about special capabilities is indeed for emergencies only, and even then, it's ethically questionable. Tell Patricia to pound sand." She threatened fines. "Let them try. You'll win in court and they'll end up paying your legal fees. Document everything. Keep records of all communication." That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA board. It was a formal notice stating that I was required to provide snow removal services for all properties starting immediately. The email listed out all 23 addresses and specified that driveways must be cleared within 4 hours of snowfall ending. I replied simply, "I decline. This demand has no legal basis. I will continue to maintain my own property only." The response came within minutes from Patricia. "You have been warned. Fines will be assessed." 2 days later, Vermont got hit with the first major snowstorm of the season. 14 inches fell overnight, and by morning, the entire subdivision was buried. I got up early, started my truck, and spent 45 minutes clearing my own driveway. The plow cut through the snow efficiently, pushing it to the sides in neat banks. My driveway was spotless, a clear path of dark asphalt leading from my garage to the street. Then I parked my truck in the garage and went inside to make breakfast. Around 9 in the morning, my doorbell started ringing. I ignored it. Then my phone started buzzing. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. By 10, there was pounding on my door. I opened it to find Patricia and 2 other board members. Donald Fletcher, a retired accountant who lived 4 houses down, and Margaret Chen, no relation to my lawyer, who worked from home doing something with computers. "Why haven't you plowed the driveways?" Patricia demanded, her face already red despite the cold. "Because I'm not required to," I said calmly. "People can't get out. We have jobs, appointments, responsibilities." "Then I suggest you hire a snow removal service. I can recommend a few good ones." Donald stepped forward. "Be reasonable, Trevor. Your driveway is clear. It would only take you a few hours to help everyone else." A few hours of my time, my fuel, my equipment wear and tear, and my liability if something goes wrong, all for free. That's not reasonable, Donald. What's unreasonable is you showing up at my door expecting free labor. Margaret tried a different approach. "What if we paid you something?" "I charge $200 per driveway for my commercial clients. I'd need proper insurance riders, signed contracts, and payment up front." "Are you prepared to organize that?" Patricia practically spat her response. $200, that's robbery. You're taking advantage of your neighbors." "No, Patricia, that's my professional rate. You're the ones trying to take advantage of me." "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual paying work to do." I closed the door. The pounding resumed for a minute, then stopped. By noon, I had received an official notice via email. The HOA was fining me $500 for failure to maintain community standards. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called me back within an hour. "This is actually good for you. They're documenting their harassment. Don't pay the fine. Let them escalate. We'll crush them in court if they try to put a lien on your property." That evening, I noticed several of my neighbors attempting to shovel their driveways by hand. It was backbreaking work in 14 inches of heavy, wet snow. Part of me felt bad, but I reminded myself that this wasn't my responsibility. They had created this situation by demanding free labor instead of simply hiring a service like adults. The next morning brought another 6 inches of snow. I cleared my driveway again, the only pristine patch of asphalt in the entire subdivision. The contrast was stark. My property looked maintained and accessible. Everyone else's looked buried and abandoned. My phone exploded with angry calls and texts. I documented everything. Patricia's message was particularly nasty. "Your selfishness is showing your true character. Everyone in this community now knows what kind of person you are," I replied. "The kind who doesn't work for free." "Yes, I suppose they do." 3 days passed. The subdivision looked like a disaster zone. Some people had managed to partially clear their driveways. Others had given up and were parking on the street, though that meant trudging through deep snow to reach their front doors. The mail carrier was having trouble navigating the unplowed streets. I later learned that Patricia had contacted 3 snow removal companies, but they were all booked solid with their regular clients. The storm had hit the entire region, and anyone with a plow was working around the clock for people who had contracts or could pay premium emergency rates. On the 4th day, I was loading equipment into my truck for a job when Patricia appeared again. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked. "People are missing work. Sandra Morrison has a medical appointment she can't get to. The Hoffmans have a baby and they're running out of formula because they can't drive to the store. Patricia, this didn't have to be a crisis. If you had simply hired a snow removal service at the beginning of winter, or if you had asked politely and offered fair compensation, none of this would be happening. We can't afford professional rates for everyone. That's not my problem. You created this mess by trying to force free labor out of me. Actions have consequences." She stared at me with pure hatred. "I will make your life hell in this community. You're already trying. How's that working out?" I drove off to my job site. I had been contracted to clear the parking lot of a medical office building in downtown Bennington. The job took 3 hours and paid $600. When I returned home that evening, I noticed several neighbors glaring at me from their windows. The following week, things escalated. The HOA sent another fine notice, this time for $1,000 for repeated violations of community standards. They also claimed I was in violation of the aesthetic maintenance clause because my clear driveway was creating an unequal appearance compared to other properties. Marcus nearly choked when I read him that one. "They're fining you for maintaining your property too well. Trevor, this is gold. They're building our case for us." I received a formal letter stating that if I didn't pay the $1,500 in fines within 10 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. Marcus filed a motion in Bennington County Superior Court challenging the fines and requesting an injunction against the HOA. Meanwhile, the subdivision's situation grew more desperate. Another storm hit, dropping 8 inches. My driveway was clear within an hour. Everyone else struggled. I watched from my living room window as Donald Fletcher, who had to be at least 70, tried to shovel his driveway and had to stop every few minutes, bent over and breathing hard. My neighbor to the left, Gary Thompson, a decent guy who had never bothered me, knocked on my door that evening. "Trevor, I get it. The HOA was wrong to demand free work, but is there any way I could hire you to do my driveway, just mine? I'll pay your rate." I considered it. "Gary, I appreciate you being reasonable. But if I plow your driveway, Patricia will use it as ammunition, claiming I'm playing favorites or some nonsense. I'm sorry, but I need to keep clear boundaries until this legal issue is resolved." He nodded, disappointed but understanding. "Yeah, I figured." For what it's worth, not all of us agree with Patricia. She called that board meeting when half the community couldn't attend, then pushed through that vote with just her 2 friends supporting it. This was interesting information. Was it a valid board vote? I don't know. I'm not sure she followed proper procedures. There's supposed to be notice given 3 days in advance for any board meeting, and she only sent the email the day before. I thanked Gary for the information and immediately called Marcus. If the board vote was improper, then the entire demand was never legitimate HOA action, Marcus explained. It was just Patricia making up rules. That strengthens your position significantly. Can you get copies of the HOA bylaws requirements for board meetings? I already had them. I sent Marcus the relevant sections. According to the bylaws, any board meeting required 72 hours notice to all homeowners, and at least 4 board members needed to be present for a quorum. The HOA board consisted of 5 members. If only Patricia and her 2 friends voted, they didn't even have a legal quorum. Marcus filed an amended motion including this information. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life in Maple Ridge got increasingly tense. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield calling me selfish and worse. I documented it and installed security cameras around my property. 2 days later, The cameras caught Patricia herself walking up my driveway at 11 at night. She didn't do anything, just stood there staring at my house for several minutes before leaving. It was creepy, and I saved the footage. The subdivision's Facebook group, which I had been added to when I moved in but rarely checked, had exploded with posts about me. Patricia had written a long rant about neighbors who refused to help their community without naming me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. The comments were divided. About half agreed with her, calling me selfish and demanding I help. The other half pointed out that demanding free labor was unreasonable and that the HOA should have handled this properly from the start. One comment from Sarah Fletcher, Donald's wife, caught my attention. "Patricia, you never even asked Trevor nicely. You showed up demanding free work and threatening fines. That's not how you ask for help. This whole situation is your fault." Patricia had responded with 3 angry paragraphs about community values and social responsibility. Another storm hit the following week. This one was particularly bad. 16 inches with strong winds that created drifts up to 3 feet in places. I had to plow my driveway 3 times during the storm to keep up with the accumulation. Each time, I could feel eyes watching me from the surrounding houses. By this point, several neighbors had gotten smart and hired people with smaller equipment or paid teenagers with snowblowers to at least make paths. The Hoffmans, with the baby Patricia had mentioned, had a narrow track carved through their driveway. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. Patricia's house, however, remained buried. I found this curious until I realized she was making herself into a martyr. She was deliberately not clearing her driveway to make a point, to show how much the community was suffering without my help. The day of the court hearing arrived. It was a cold February morning, the sky that particular shade of gray that promised more snow. I met Marcus at the Bennington County Courthouse, a stately building in downtown Bennington that had been there since the 19th century. Patricia arrived with Donald and Margaret, plus a lawyer I didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Robert Langley. We filed into the courtroom, and I was surprised by how informal it seemed. Judge Elizabeth Morrison, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, reviewed the motions at her bench. "This is about HOA fines related to snow removal," she asked, sounding almost amused. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said. "The HOA is attempting to compel my client to provide free labor under threat of financial penalties. They have no legal authority to do so." Langley stood. "Your Honor, HOAs have broad authority to maintain community standards. Mr. Samson has equipment that would benefit the entire community, and the HOA has the right to require residents to contribute to community welfare." "By working for free?" Judge Morrison asked sharply. "By contributing their capabilities when they have special resources." The judge turned to Patricia. "Miss Whitmore, you're the HOA president. Walk me through your reasoning here." Patricia stood, smoothing her skirt. "Your Honor, we're a small community trying to look out for each other. Mr. Samson has a plow. It seemed natural that he would help his neighbors. Instead, he's been selfish and uncooperative, creating division in our community. Did you offer to pay him?" "Well, no, but did you ask politely or did you demand?" Patricia hesitated. "I informed him of the board's decision." "After a board meeting, tell me about that meeting." This was where things got interesting. Langley tried to intervene, but the judge wanted to hear from Patricia directly. Under questioning, Patricia admitted that she had called the meeting with less than 24 hours' notice and that only 3 of the 5 board members attended. "So you didn't have a quorum?" Judge Morrison asked. "We had enough to make a decision. According to your own bylaws, which I've reviewed, you need at least 4 members present. You didn't have a legitimate board meeting, which means this wasn't an official HOA action. This was you, personally, trying to force a neighbor to work for free. Is that accurate? Patricia's face turned red. It was for the good of the community. That's not how this works, Miss Whitmore. You can't just make up rules and fine people for not following them. Judge Morrison turned to the HOA's lawyer. Mr. Langley, do you have any legal precedent for compelling free labor from HOA residents? Langley shuffled through his papers. Your Honor, there are cases where HOAs have required residents to contribute to community maintenance. Maintenance they're already paying HOA fees for, I assume. What are the HOA fees in this community? Marcus provided the information. $300 annually, Your Honor, primarily for common area landscaping and street lighting. And snow removal was never part of the services covered by those fees. No, Your Honor, each resident is responsible for their own property. Judge Morrison leaned back. This seems pretty straightforward, Miss Whitmore. You tried to force Mr. Samson to provide services the HOA doesn't pay for and never contracted for. When he refused, you levied improper fines. Not only am I dismissing these fines, but I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Samson's legal fees. Furthermore, I'm issuing an injunction preventing the HOA from any further attempts to compel free labor from residents. Patricia stood up. But Your Honor, the community needs to hire a snow removal service like every other neighborhood in Vermont, Miss Whitmore. If residents want their driveways plowed, they can pay for it individually or pool resources to hire someone. They cannot force a neighbor to do it for free. This is America, not a feudal estate. The gavel came down. I had won. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt vindicated but not entirely satisfied. The situation had damaged relationships in the neighborhood, and even though I was legally and morally right, I knew some neighbors would hold a grudge. Patricia, on the other hand, was furious. She practically shoved past me on the courthouse steps, refusing to make eye contact. Langley looked embarrassed, probably realizing he had taken a case with no legal merit. Marcus shook my hand. Congratulations. They'll have to pay about $4,000 in legal fees. Maybe that'll teach them not to harass residents. Maybe, I said, but I doubted it. I was right to doubt. 2 days after the court ruling, I found a nail deliberately placed behind my truck tire. The security cameras caught Patricia's car slowly driving past around 3 in the morning. I couldn't see her placing the nail, but the timing was suspicious. I filed a police report and sent the footage to the Bennington Police Department. Officer James Martin came to take my statement. He was a solid guy in his 40s who had lived in Bennington his entire life. This is a civil dispute, right? The HOA thing, he asked. Yes, but it's escalating. I'm concerned about property damage or worse. I'll drive by your street more often on patrol, and I'll have a conversation with Miss Whitmore. She needs to understand that losing in court doesn't give her the right to retaliate. I appreciated his help, but I also knew how these things worked. Without direct proof, there wasn't much the police could do. The next week brought more snow and more tension. By now, word had spread beyond our subdivision. A local newspaper, the Bennington Banner, ran a story about the court case. The headline read, HOA ordered to pay legal fees after demanding free snow removal. The article painted Patricia as an overreaching HOA president and me as a homeowner standing up for property rights. This made Patricia even more angry. She posted on the subdivision Facebook group claiming the newspaper had gotten the story wrong and that I had misrepresented the situation to the judge. Several neighbors called her out, pointing out that the judge had made the ruling based on facts and HOA bylaws, not my word alone. The post devolved into a massive argument. Some people defended Patricia, saying the community should work together. Others pointed out that working together doesn't mean forced labor. A few people brought up other issues with Patricia's leadership. Complaints I hadn't known about regarding how she handled HOA funds and made decisions without proper board votes. One comment from Jessica Whitmore, no relation to Patricia, was particularly damning. Patricia used HOA funds to pay for landscaping at her own house last summer, claiming it was for entrance beautification even though her house isn't at the entrance. Maybe instead of harassing Trevor, we should audit the HOA finances. This sparked a whole new controversy. Multiple homeowners demanded a special meeting to review HOA finances and potentially remove Patricia from the board. According to the bylaws, 15% of homeowners could call for a special meeting. With 23 properties in the subdivision, that meant at least 4 households needed to sign a petition. Within 2 days, 8 households had signed. A special meeting was scheduled for the following week at the community center clubhouse. I wasn't sure if I should attend. On one hand, I had every right to be there. On the other hand, my presence might inflame tensions. I decided to go, primarily to observe and ensure nothing else was decided about me without my presence. The meeting was packed. All but 3 households sent representatives. Patricia sat at the front table looking defiant, flanked by Donald and Margaret, her only remaining allies on the board. Gary Thompson, my reasonable neighbor, stood to speak first. We're here because we've lost confidence in Patricia's leadership. The lawsuit with Trevor was just the latest example of her making decisions without proper authority. We need to review the finances and potentially elect new leadership. Patricia interrupted. This is a witch hunt orchestrated by Trevor because he can't stand being held accountable. I haven't organized anything, I said calmly from my seat. Other homeowners called this meeting. Sarah Fletcher stood. Patricia, you've been making unilateral decisions for 2 years. The lawsuit just brought it to everyone's attention. We deserve transparency about how our fees are being used. Another neighbor, Tom Martinez, who I'd only met once, presented a document. I requested financial records from the HOA, as is my right under the bylaws. Patricia refused. That alone is a violation of her duties as president. The meeting grew heated. Patricia defended her tenure, claiming she worked tirelessly for the community. Others pointed out specific instances of overreach and financial opacity. Donald tried to support her but seemed uncomfortable, probably realizing he had backed the wrong horse. Finally, someone called for a vote of no confidence. The bylaws required a 2/3 majority of homeowners to remove a board member. We had 20 representatives present out of 23 households. The vote was 16-4. Patricia was removed as president, along with Donald and Margaret for their roles in the illegal fines. New board members were elected on the spot, including Gary Thompson as president and Jessica Whitmore as treasurer. One of their first actions was to hire an independent auditor to review HOA finances. Patricia didn't take it well. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and pointed at me. This is all your fault. You've destroyed this community. No, Patricia, Gary said firmly. You did this to yourself. You tried to abuse your authority and you're facing the consequences. She stormed out. Donald and Margaret followed, looking defeated. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to apologize. Sarah Fletcher was nearly in tears. I'm so sorry, Trevor. We should have stood up to Patricia earlier. This never should have gotten this far. It's okay, I said. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life. I never wanted all this drama. Will you consider helping with snow removal going forward? Gary asked. For pay, of course. The new board wants to create a community snow removal fund. Residents can opt in for $25 per storm, and we'd hire you to plow participating driveways. Would you be interested? It was a reasonable proposal. Let me think about it. I'd need to work out the logistics, insurance, liability, but I'm open to discussion. Over the following weeks, the auditor's report came back. Patricia had indeed misused HOA funds, about $3,000 over 2 years for various personal expenses she disguised as community improvements. The new board decided to demand repayment and filed a small claims lawsuit when Patricia refused. I also learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia's real estate business had been struggling. Apparently, her reputation in the community had damaged her professional standing. Several clients had dropped her after the newspaper article, not wanting to work with someone who'd been publicly rebuked by a judge for overreach. In March, as winter began winding down, I reached an agreement with the new HOA board. I would provide snow removal for participating households at $30 per storm, a discounted rate from my commercial pricing. 15 households signed up, giving me $450 per storm plus goodwill in the community. The HOA handled collection and payment, so I didn't have to chase down individual homeowners. The first storm under the new arrangement, I plowed all 15 driveways plus my own. It took about 5 hours, but it was worth it. The next day, I found a thank you note and cookies from Sarah Fletcher. Gary Thompson stopped by to tell me how much he appreciated the service. Things had finally normalized. Patricia kept to herself, rarely seen outside her house. Donald and Margaret seemed to have distanced themselves from her after the financial irregularities came to light. The community felt more relaxed, less like there was constant drama simmering beneath the surface. In April, I was at the local hardware store picking up supplies when I ran into Officer Martin. He asked how things were going in the subdivision. "Much better," I told him. "New HOA leadership. Everything's calm." "Good. We never found proof about that nail in your driveway, but I had several conversations with Miss Whitmore. I think she got the message that retaliation has consequences." I thanked him for his help. It was a relief that the worst was over. But I was wrong. The worst wasn't quite over yet. In May, just as the last snow had melted and everyone was focused on spring landscaping, I received notice that Patricia was suing me personally for defamation and emotional distress. The lawsuit claimed that I had orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation and had made false statements that led to her removal from the HOA board and damage to her business. It was absurd. I had done nothing but defend myself from her harassment, but I had to take it seriously. Marcus reviewed the lawsuit and assured me it was frivolous, but it would still require time and money to defend. "She's lashing out," Marcus explained. "People like Patricia can't accept responsibility for their actions. She's convinced herself that you're the villain in this story. The good news is that everything you did is documented and legally sound. She doesn't have a case." The legal process dragged on through the summer. Patricia's lawyer, a different one this time, filed motion after motion. Each one was dismissed, but each one required a response. It was harassment by litigation, and while I knew I'd ultimately win, it was exhausting. In August, we finally had a hearing on Patricia's lawsuit. This time, the judge was less patient. Judge Thomas Richardson, a no-nonsense man in his 50s, read through the file before the hearing even started. When Patricia's lawyer began presenting her case, Judge Richardson interrupted. "Counsel, help me understand what your client thinks she'll accomplish here." Mr. Samson defended himself from improper HOA actions. A previous judge ruled in his favor. Your client was removed by a community vote, not by Mr. Samson. Where's the defamation? Patricia's lawyer, a young woman named Amanda Foster who looked uncomfortable, tried to argue that I had influenced the community vote. Judge Richardson wasn't buying it. Miss Whitmore, the judge addressed Patricia directly, you're upset that your neighbors lost confidence in your leadership. That's not defamation. That's democracy in action within your HOA structure. This lawsuit is frivolous, and I'm dismissing it with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm sanctioning you and ordering you to pay Mr. Samson's legal fees for this action as well. You've wasted the court's time and his money with a baseless claim. Patricia tried to argue, but the judge cut her off. I'm also noting in my order that any further frivolous litigation against Mr. Samson by you will result in additional sanctions. You need to move on, Miss Whitmore. You created this situation through your own poor judgment. Accept responsibility and stop harassing your neighbor. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I finally felt like it was truly over. Marcus tallied up the legal fees Patricia now owed me from both lawsuits. The total came to about $7,000. Combined with the $3,000 she had to repay the HOA, Patricia was on the hook for $10,000. She'll probably file for bankruptcy, Marcus said, but at least she can't harass you anymore without serious legal consequences. He was right. The next few months were blissfully quiet. Patricia listed her house for sale in September. I heard through Gary that she was moving to New Hampshire to live with family. Her real estate business had indeed collapsed, and she couldn't afford to stay in Bennington anymore. Part of me felt bad for her. She destroyed her own life through stubbornness and an inability to admit she was wrong. But mostly, I just felt relieved that the drama was finally, truly over. The following winter, the snow removal arrangement with the HOA worked perfectly. I plowed participating driveways efficiently, got paid promptly, and everyone was happy. No drama, no demands, no harassment. Just a simple business arrangement that worked for everyone involved. I even developed friendships with several neighbors. Gary and I started getting together for beers occasionally. Sarah and Donald Fletcher invited me to their holiday party. The Hoffmans, with their now toddler, waved whenever they saw me. The community felt like an actual community, not a war zone. In January, 2 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, I was plowing driveways after a modest 6-inch snowfall when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's old house. A young family was moving in, a couple in their 30s with 2 elementary school-aged kids. I finished their driveway along with the others and stopped by to introduce myself. The husband, Mike Patterson, was friendly and appreciative. Thanks for clearing the driveway. The previous owner warned us that winters here are serious business. You talked to Patricia? I asked, curious. Yeah, she was. Intense. Spent like 20 minutes warning us about the HOA and one neighbor in particular who caused her all kinds of problems. I'm guessing that's you, he grinned. I laughed. Probably. Long story, but the short version is she tried to force me to plow everyone's driveways for free, and it didn't go well for her. She mentioned something about that, said you were unreasonable. But honestly, from how she described it, it sounded like she was in the wrong. Anyway, we're glad to be here. This seems like a nice neighborhood. It is now, I said. Over time, the story of the HOA snow removal dispute became something of a legend in Maple Ridge. New residents would hear about it and usually found it funny, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The community had learned from the experience, and the new board maintained transparency and reasonable policies. Patricia's lawsuit debts followed her to New Hampshire. I later learned through Marcus that she had indeed filed for bankruptcy, and I was listed as a creditor. I'd probably never see that money, but that was fine. The point had never been about money. It was about standing up for basic property rights and not being bullied by someone abusing a small amount of authority. By the third winter after the initial incident, it felt like ancient history. I had expanded my snow removal business beyond Maple Ridge, contracting with several commercial properties and residential communities around Bennington. The experience, while stressful, had actually helped my business grow as word spread about my professionalism and reliability. One Saturday in February, I was at the local diner having breakfast when Officer Martin slid into the booth across from me. "Trevor, got a minute?" "Sure. What's up?" "Remember Patricia Whitmore? She's been arrested in New Hampshire." I set down my coffee. "For what?" "Fraud. Apparently, she joined another HOA board over there and started the same tricks, misusing funds. But she went bigger this time, embezzled about $30,000. Someone caught on and reported her. With her history here, the prosecutor is throwing the book at her." I didn't know how to feel about that. That's actually sad. She couldn't let it go, couldn't learn. "Some people can't," Martin agreed. "Anyway, the prosecutor might want you to testify about the pattern of behavior. You willing? If it helps ensure she faces consequences, and maybe can't do this to other people, yeah, I'll testify." The trial happened that summer in Manchester, New Hampshire. I drove up and spent a day on the witness stand describing Patricia's actions in Vermont. The improper board meetings, the illegal fines, the harassment, and the frivolous lawsuit. The prosecutor used my testimony to establish a pattern of abusing authority and misusing HOA positions for personal gain. Patricia sat at the defense table looking older and defeated. She'd gained weight, her hair had gone grayer, and she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Her lawyer tried to argue that her actions in New Hampshire were different from Vermont, but the jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered restitution to the New Hampshire HOA. It was a harsh sentence, but the judge noted that Patricia had been given multiple chances to change her behavior and had instead escalated. Driving back to Vermont that evening, I thought about how a simple demand for free snow removal had ultimately led to someone going to prison. If Patricia had just approached me politely, offered fair payment, or accepted my no gracefully, none of this would have happened. Her life wouldn't have been destroyed. But she'd chosen pride over reason, control over cooperation, and eventually criminality over honesty. Every step of the way, she'd had choices, and she'd consistently made the wrong ones. Back in Maple Ridge, life continued peacefully. The HOA functioned well under Gary's leadership. I continued providing snow removal services. The community thrived without drama. Sometimes, on quiet winter evenings after plowing, I'd sit in my truck looking at the neat rows of cleared driveways and think about how close I'd come to just giving in to Patricia's demands. It would have been easier in the short term. A few hours of work, keep the peace, avoid conflict. But it would have set a terrible precedent. It would have said that bullying works, that people with a little authority can compel others to work for free, that standing up for yourself isn't worth the trouble. I was glad I'd stood my ground. Not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever faced an unreasonable HOA demand. For every homeowner who'd been fined for ridiculous violations, harassed for minor infractions, or pushed around by petty tyrants on a power trip. The snow continued to fall each winter, and I continued to plow. But now it was on my terms for fair compensation, with respect for my time and property. The way it should have been from the beginning. 3 years after the initial incident, Gary knocked on my door one spring morning. He looked excited about something. "Trevor, The board wants to give you an award at the annual meeting, Community Member of the Year. We know you don't like attention, but we really want to recognize how you stood up for property rights and helped clean up the HOA. I was uncomfortable with the idea, but appreciated the gesture. Gary, I just defended myself. I'm not a hero. You're more of a hero than you think. After you stood up to Patricia, 3 other homeowners came forward with complaints about her behavior that they'd been too intimidated to raise before. You gave people courage to demand better governance. That matters. I attended the annual meeting and accepted the small plaque they'd made. Several neighbors gave speeches about how the community had improved over the past few years. It was genuinely touching, though I kept my own remarks brief. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life without unreasonable demands, I said. I'm glad it worked out for everyone. Thanks for making Maple Ridge a real community. The applause was warm and genuine. Looking around the room at my neighbors, I realized that the difficult conflict had ultimately made the community stronger. People were more engaged with HOA governance now, more willing to question decisions and demand transparency. The bylaws had been updated to prevent future abuses. Board meetings were well attended and properly conducted. Patricia's attempted tyranny had accidentally created a more democratic, functional HOA. There was irony in that. That summer, I got a letter from New Hampshire. It was from Patricia. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and handwritten. Her penmanship was shaky and there were spots where tears had smudged the ink. Trevor, I know you probably hate me. I hate myself most days. Prison gives you a lot of time to think about your mistakes. I realized that everything that happened was my fault. I was insecure about my authority, my business was failing, and I took it out on you and others. I tried to control everything because my own life felt out of control. I'm sorry for what I put you through. You were right to stand up to me. I hope you and the community are doing well. I hope someday I can rebuild my life and be a better person. Patricia. I read it twice, then filed it away. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. It was the first genuine accountability she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. Maybe prison had finally given her the perspective she'd needed all along. The story could end there, with lessons learned and lives moving forward. But there's one more piece worth mentioning. 5 years after the initial confrontation, I was at a regional contractors association meeting in Burlington when a woman approached me during the networking hour. She introduced herself as Linda Morrison, no relation to Judge Morrison, and said she was starting an HOA consulting business focused on preventing governance abuses. I read about your case in law school, she said. It's taught as an example of HOA overreach. I'm building a business helping communities create better bylaws and governance structures. Would you be willing to share your experience at some workshops I'm planning? I thought about it. Talking publicly about the situation wasn't really my style, but if it could help other communities avoid similar conflicts, it seemed worthwhile. I ended up speaking at 3 workshops over the next year, always to audiences of HOA board members and homeowners. I told the story straightforwardly, emphasizing the importance of proper procedures, legal authority, and treating neighbors with respect rather than demands. The feedback was positive. Several people told me they'd realized their own HOAs were making similar mistakes and planned to push for reforms. A few board members admitted they'd been too controlling and needed to step back. One elderly man in Montpelier told me, "My HOA president tried to fine me for parking my boat in my driveway. After hearing your story, I looked up the actual bylaws. Turns out there's no rule against it. She just didn't like how it looked. I pushed back and she backed down. Thanks for giving me the confidence to stand up for myself. These conversations reminded me that HOA disputes aren't really about snow removal or boats or lawn height. They're about power, control, and whether people will stand up when authority is abused. Most people want to avoid conflict, so they comply with unreasonable demands. But compliance enables bad behavior to continue and escalate. Standing up is hard. It invites conflict, stress, and potentially costly legal battles. But sometimes it's necessary, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Back in Maple Ridge, life settled into a comfortable routine. The neighborhood kids learned they could make extra money in winter by helping me spread salt on walkways after I plowed. The annual HOA meetings became pleasant social events rather than tense confrontations. Property values increased as the community developed a reputation for good governance. Patricia was released from prison after serving 2 years. I heard she moved to Florida to start over somewhere nobody knew her history. I hoped she'd learned from her mistakes and found some peace. Holding on to anger against her seemed pointless. She'd faced consequences for her actions. That was enough. On cold winter mornings, when I'm out plowing driveways as dawn breaks over the Green Mountains, I sometimes reflect on how one confrontation changed not just my life, but an entire community's trajectory. How standing firm on a simple principle, the right to not work for free, cascaded into reforms that improved life for dozens of families. The snow continues to fall each winter. The plows continue to run. But now it happens through cooperation and fair compensation rather than demands and threats. It's such a small thing, really, but small things matter. They say good fences make good neighbors. I'd add that fair dealings and mutual respect make good communities. You can't force people to help you. You can't demand free labor just because you have a title or a little authority. You have to ask politely, offer fair compensation, and accept no gracefully. Patricia never learned that lesson until it was too late, but the rest of Maple Ridge did, and we're all better for it. Last winter, 7 years after that first confrontation, we had the worst blizzard Vermont had seen in decades. 32 inches fell in 24 hours. I worked around the clock, plowing not just Maple Ridge but my commercial contracts throughout Bennington. It was exhausting but satisfying work. When I finally finished and returned home, I found my driveway had been shoveled by hand, all the walkways too. A note on my door read, "Thanks for everything you do, Trevor. We wanted to return the favor. Rest up. The neighborhood." I stood there in the pre-dawn cold, reading that note, and felt genuinely moved. This was what community was supposed to be. People helping each other voluntarily, out of genuine appreciation and goodwill, not because someone demanded it. I went inside, made coffee, and watched the sun rise over the snow-covered subdivision. Every driveway was clear. Every house was accessible. And it had all happened through cooperation, respect, and fair dealing. That's how it should always work. That's how it works now in Maple Ridge, at least. And if there's any lesson in this whole long saga, it's this: stand up for yourself when authority oversteps. Demand proper procedures. Refuse unreasonable demands. Document everything. Get good legal advice. And never, ever work for free when someone tries to force you to. The snow falls. The plows run. Life goes on. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing your ground makes everything better for everyone in the end.